with fragulous crown and with sceptre abraid, draw Ragslin short work of the innkeeper made. The inn burnt to ash, the captives were many, goblet kind had reduced them to cowering filthenny. So raise it, your goblets, and drain them with pride. Draw Ragslin, the true soul, had led you glide.
Volo Tham Gedarm. Just who is Volo? He shows up in the early parts of Baldur's Gate 3, and then you find him in various predicaments, such as here at the Goblin Camp. Volo, in short, was a legendary traveler and storyteller, most famous for his guidebook, which was published by Tim Waterdeep Limited. He was kind of widely regarded as this go-to guy of the Forgotten Realms, even though his information was not necessarily the most truthful or accurate. And as a wizard, he was of middling skill, but many considered him far too curious for his own good, and he kept finding himself in really crazy scenarios, like here at the Goblin Camp. As a prisoner of someone who loves his poetry and fake rhymes. His specialty was rare and unusual spells, and he actually is believed to have invented some minor spells, mostly regarding the finding and documenting of information, which was his primary forte, writing these guidebooks. And as far as his sagely activities go, he was mostly interested in the spells and activities of humans and the human wizards, and his I would argue his primary expertise, but many people would say it's his second. It was the geography and lore of the known human realms of Faerun, and you find Volo popping up all over the place in not just the books, but other mediums like what we're seeing here with Baldur's Gate 3, and of course Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 as well. Now, for a long time, Volo was able to go out and travel the world and explore, but he eventually earned the wrath of some far more powerful wizards after the publication of a pamphlet called Volo's Guide to All Things Magical, in which he revealed some things he probably shouldn't have. Now, this sent Volo into hiding, and he then had to spend most of his time on his secondary interest, which was, of course, the writing of the travel guides that took us all across the face of the Forgotten Realms and the realm of Faerun. Now, what's really interesting about Volo, and probably one of the things that most people remember from the first couple of games, or if you've read the books, is that Elminster himself edited, annotated, and provided references for pretty much all of Volo's travel guides. What's also funny is that Elminster was very upfront about his sort of amusement at Volo's personality, and he has described Volo as an engaging rogue and an entertaining gossip who was irrepressible, nay, pompous and pretentious, and given to exaggeration, misrepresentation, and flights of fancy. And I think it's really funny that we see this on full display during this encounter with him in the Druid Grove early on in Baldur's Gate 3, because he asks you about the dragon at the front gates, and you're like, there was no dragon. And he's like, witness failed to notice there was a dragon at the gate. And then if you continue to have conversations, like if you have to speak with the animals, you can talk to the bear next to him, and the bear's like, I'm telling him the story of how I got here and everything. And then you look over at Volo's book, and instead he's sketching this picture of the bear ripping all the tieflings to bits and pieces because, as Elminster said, he was given to exaggeration, misrepresentation, and flights of fancy. Now, what's also interesting is Elminster viewed Volo as being indiscreet to the point of recklessness during his documentation of various things that were really dangerous. He obviously had a skill at getting into places and getting out of places occasionally, but the big issue was, as Elminster said, the spying and reporting of everything folk would fain keep secret for good reason. Elminster also had to heavily edit Volo's works and actually remove a lot of information to get rid of the errors or flights of fancy, as it were, the distortions that might put people at harm or even, endanger Faerun itself. But it is worth noting that by the time that Volo's Guide to the Sword Coast eventually was published, Elminster is quoted as saying, "He's getting better, I suppose. Better. You needn't tell him I said that." Now, perhaps one of my most entertaining moments in early access so far is the fact that Volo ends up in the Goblin camp as the prisoner of the goblins, and he has an admirer who basically views him as her pet. And this goes back to what Elminster said about him, not paying attention to what was going on around him because he was constantly getting into trouble, too curious for his own good, of course. And we find him here because he, as we talk to him in the grove, he says, "I've got a fast tongue and a potion of invisibility. I'll be fine." And you find him at the beginning of this encounter, as we showed at the beginning of this video. He's giving this performance to the goblins, where he's trying to rattle off things off the top of his head and sort of do a rap battle sort of thing in the moment, but with rhymes, and he's just making words up. And then if you enter into a conversation with him, he fumbles, and the goblin will accuse you of breaking him and haul him off to a cage. And it's just he's constantly getting into those types of situations, which is one of the reasons why Elminster is always concerned about him, because even though he is a brilliant mind, he's like a cat, too curious for his own good and constantly getting into situations that aren't necessarily good for him.
But is superstition all? These goblins are informed by a kind of strategy.
Volo created a variety of different works, such as Volo's Guide to All Things Magical, his Guide to Magic Appendix 3, Guide to Waterdeep, Guide to Westgate and the Dragon Coast, his complete Guide to the Behavior of Nymphs, reluctantly unpublished, deemed too naughty by Elminster, although it did eventually see the light of day as a chapter book under Volo's pen name of Valhaleria the Vaunted, which was a title he used for many of his more salacious works in the future. But he also did such guides like the Guide to Monsters, the Waterdeep in Cerudian, and of course on Goblins, My Life Among the Conquering Host, which we can only assume is being worked on as he is here in Baldur's Gate 3. Now, if you've never heard of Volo before, you can be forgiven if you're new to the Baldur's Gate franchise. But if you're not, you may have heard mention of him before. And if you want to know more, the easiest way is to go dive into the Forgotten Realms novels, of which there are many books that have been written over the past several decades. They are, for the most part, fun reads if you've never dove into them, and he makes a appearance in several of them. I would argue that he is sort of a major background character, even if he's not necessarily a main character. So, if you want to learn more about Volo and have a better understanding of him as he appears in Baldur's Gate 3, don't forget to sink your teeth into a Forgotten Realms novel. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon, everybody. Support if you can. Don't forget to join the Discord. Links are down below. We'll see everyone in the next episode or live stream.